have heard of the Baudin expedition here in this room? Obviously Robert. And what do you know about the expedition? A little bit about the emu possibly, and maybe some one of the few publications about it. But there was quite more. And the ornithologist of Baudin, Nicolas Baudin, he was one of the people who departed in the turn of the century, and he was one of the people who was involved in the Enlightenment years of the French Revolution. At first I'm going to talk a little bit about history, and one of the fascinating things that will be the red line in my presentation is connecting the dots. Because what always happens is you find some common ancestors in things you find out in your life, things you meet, and I came across the Baudin expedition quite a lot of times, but I didn't know it. So I will show you a little bit what those dots are. These are the things. That's a statue of Willem de Vlaming, and Willem de Vlaming, he lived on the island of Vlieland. I will come back on this later. This is Vivonna Beach on Kangaroo Island, South Australia. A place, I never heard of it. I've stayed at that place, but I didn't have any connection. And it's the same with Buffon in the garden of the Jardin des Plantes on the Paris Museum grounds. I will come on this back during the lecture. What I did for my thesis is, at first, I visited the Paris collection for identification purposes, and one of my researchers was slender-billed curlews. And I looked into identification features of these birds, and while wandering around in the collection, on one moment I saw a parrot, and on this parrot there was the sign Baudin. And I thought, oh, nice Baudin. Just look it up on Google and try to find what could I find out on Baudin. There was hardly anything to find, so Robert was constantly harassing me when I was in training, and he said, you have to do a PhD thesis. And that was something that was wandering around in my head. On one moment I thought, Robert can't write. I will write a note and we'll send it to some professors on some university and see maybe someone would go into the adventure with me. And it finally happened 4 years ago. And I put down some key questions for myself, which I wanted to answer in this research. And these are to establish the documentation of specimens, from what is going on, what is present in the collection, what is present in literature, what is present in manuscripts. Secondly is to trace the whereabouts of the expedition specimens. So are they only in Paris? I will later on tell you a little bit more on the expedition, but these are the front questions. The catalogue of birds. Is there any catalogue? And could I reconstruct the catalogue? And to establish the ornithological heritage of the 1800-1804 Baudin expedition. To answer these questions, I needed to ask myself, how was the ornithology organized before the expedition departure, in general? It's the same. What were the original collecting localities? Who were the original collectors and what were their aims? The third question is, where were specimens acquired and by whom, and how many specimens were brought back, and who played a role in the taxidermy process? And the last question is, how were specimens dispersed, and if so, where did they end up, and how do they still survive? What can the Baudin specimens add to the modern understanding of biodiversity and taxonomy? And to answer this, I have to go back into history of ornithology. And we just talked about the Cook expedition. And these two birds are from the Cook expedition. So we first have to look into history to understand what was going on before the Baudin expedition left the French shores. The most famous expedition was obviously the Cook expedition, but we got Bruni and Anticastu. We got several other expeditions which brought back some specimens. These two, the Iwi and above the Mamo, both are collected on the from the Cook expedition, the third Cook expedition on Hawaii, and both birds were donated in 1781 to the museum in Göttingen. The bird above is now in Hanover, and the lower bird is still in Göttingen. What I needed to do, and there was a guideline, there was a marvelous article by Frank Steinheimer, and he discussed the whereabouts of specimens collected prior to 1800. And Frank made an estimation of 1,500 to 3,000 specimens which should be present in modern collections to date. So what I first did is to get myself a picture clear from what is really going on prior to that time. So I have to look into the expeditions prior to 1800 and see what data is still present, what data is not present, and it's shocking. There are very few birds collected prior to 1800 with a full data set. One of the expeditions that had a full data set was an earlier Baudin expedition. I will come back on this later. What happened more in that time is there were many private collectors which got their own private collection, like in the Netherlands we got Albertus Seba. And Seba got a large collection, and he gained that collection. He was a medical person, so he went to the ships when they docked from the Far East, and he looked out for seamen who were sick. And when he saw them, he traded medicine against specimens they collected in those foreign places. And eventually, a lot of those private collections ended up with large collections, but there were very few large collections. One of those was the collection of Hans Sloane, which formed the nucleus of the British Museum. But there were not too many large collections, so many specimens were actually vanished to that. The oldest specimen, however, is a specimen here in Britain, and that's dated 1702. That was an African great parrot. That's depicted in Morris, his publication of 2012. The most important publications is, of course, Linnaeus Systema Naturae, 1785, the 10th edition, followed by Gmelin, and Gmelin used a lot of information from John Layton, and we got our big hit French hero, Monsieur Buffon. The thing is, with the first two publications, they were in Latin, the third publication was in English, and the fourth publication was in French. So everyone was looking at the turn of the century in what system to follow, and was it Latin, was it English, or was it French? Eventually we know Latin was the language to follow. The fun thing is John Layton published his general synopsis of birds, and eventually Gmelin translated all the English names from Layton into his Systema Naturae Part 13. So there was not much going on, and in French there was the revolution going on. And the revolution, this is a painting from Jacques Bertrou from 1793, gave the French exploration a little setback. The French claimed, however, a part of Western Australia, and that was done by General D'Alon. He claimed in 1772, he claimed Dirk Harper Island in Western Australia, and it was still living up in the minds of the French to get back to Australia and to see if Western Australia was diverted by an inland sea from New South Wales, which obviously was claimed by the English in 1788. 1777. What happened is Napoleon came on force in November 1799, and at that stage there was already a big expedition planned to the south, and that was planned by what a shame. The Bougainville. And the Bougainville had invited two very now famous people. These included Bonpland, and it included anyway, they made the big plan to go out to the southern seas, and what they decided to at first the Bougainville planned a very large expedition, cook-sized, around the world. Napoleon was really into this idea, but sized the expedition down. And eventually, the Bougainville, as he was too old, was set aside, and Baudin was replaced as captain of the ship. Von Humboldt, hence the name, and Bonpland decided, they heard that Baudin was leading the expedition, and they thought he's too inexperienced, he was only doing some commercial trading shipments. So they decided he's not good enough, and we go on their own, and they made the famous voyage to Tenerife and later on to Southern America. What they decided is the Institut National in Paris was taking care of finding researchers for this expedition, and they selected eventually 24 scientists to accompany Baudin on this expedition. Baudin did a previous expedition. He was employed prior to this by the Austrian government to do some research with Franz Boas, a famous botanist. And when he was in the Caribbean, his collection was confiscated by the government. And he asked the Paris government if they want to support him, of the Paris Museum, they want to support him to retrace the specimens. So they went back to the Paris Museum, did so, and they went to the Caribbean. These two pictures, one above shows the botanical garden in Santa Cruz de la Tenerife, and this botanical garden was the first inventory was made by Littroux, which was on board, and it is one of the first long botanical catalogs which still exist. And the lower photo is where the ships were stationed when they went to the Caribbean. From the Caribbean voyage on the left and on the right you see two birds. They still remain. The left one is in Vienna, the right one is also in Vienna. And there are still 140 birds left of this expedition. And that's compared to the numbers of specimens surviving prior to 1800, that's an extremely large number. 140 specimens with almost a full data set available. On the Baudin expedition, a lot of scientists were selected. On the left, there was Nicolas Thomas Baudin, the captain. Charles Alexander Leseur, he was a cannon, a gunner aboard. François Auguste Perron, he was selected as naturalist. And we got René Marguet, and René Marguet joined Baudin on the previous expedition towards the Caribbean. There is no photo, unfortunately, of no drawing of Marguet, but he's a very influential person with a lot of birds he collected on the first expedition and on the second expedition, and he collected nearly 100 type specimens, so he's of a large importance. The Baudin expedition went, at first they departed from the Havre, they went to Tenerife, made a brief stay over there. Then they went to Mauritius. From Mauritius they sailed to Australia. Australia they made landfall here in Geographic Bay at 30 May 1801, and they remained in the area until the 10th of June 1801. Then they continued up north to the Shark Bay area. They stayed here between 26th of June and 14th of July. However, it's notable that between the first visit, the two ships which were on the expedition became diverted. So not all the collection was executed on the same place from both ships. They were rejoined again afterwards in Kupang, Timor. After a stay in Timor, both ships went down towards Brunei Island, Maria Island, and the Bass Strait, and they were there from the 13th of January until the 22 May 1802. From there they went to Sydney, and both ships again became dispersed in Tasmania. One of the ships, the Le Naturaliste, went to Sydney and didn't see the ship of Baudin, so they decided to sail to Kupang to meet them again, but unfortunately the winds were very bad, so they returned, and just Baudin arrived in Sydney and the other ship returned. In this stay in Port Jackson, Leisure made quite a few drawings of the colony at the time, and those drawings are extremely important, and there were a lot of notes made by them on Aborigines, also made in Tasmania, and these are still one of the very few records of decent Aboriginal language and Aboriginal behavior. When the ships became diverted, Baudin sailed the ship to number 5, and that's Encounter Bay of this one. But Baudin went up to here, towards the Eyre Peninsula, and at Encounter Bay they met up with Matthew Flinders. And Matthew Flinders departed from England to Australia after Baudin applied for a passport to go to Australia by Joseph Banks. And Joseph Banks got his contacts with the government. They gave them a passport, but Banks said, boys, watch out, the French go to Australia, they're going to claim something, they go harassing you, so please send out an expedition, and especially as a large part of southern Australia and northern Australia was not mapped at the time. So they sent up Matthew Flinders, and Flinders came into Australia at this point, and he did the navigation up to this point, and Baudin did the navigation up to this point. What Flinders did, however, was very friendly. He shared his findings with Baudin. Later on, Flinders would regret this possibly, because the first map of Australia was drawn by the Baudin expedition and was published in 1811. That was just after Flinders was released from imprisonating his stay in prison in Mauritius. After the stay in Port Jackson, they went to King Island, and what they did in King Island, they collected some live King Island emus, the only ones we know so far. Then they continued towards Kangaroo Island. They collected the only ones Kangaroo Island emus we know of. They collected 2 birds alive, and they brought them back to France. One survived, and 1 King Island survived. King Island emu survived. Then they met up with Pendleton in Two People's Bay, at that time known as King George Sound. Then they went back to Shark Bay again, and they stayed from 16 to 23 March up there. Then they went to Kupang, Timor. From Kupang, after a little stay, and Baudin was already really sick, they went up north. And eventually at the 7th of July 1803, they returned at the height of Darwin and sailed to Mauritius, where Baudin unfortunately died. Then they went to South Africa and went back. What happened in Port Jackson is the 2 ships became diverted. One was a corvette, which was a really fast boat, and the other one was a store ship, Le Naturaliste. Baudin had some some disagreements with officers and some naturalists, as he was a marine man and the remainder were scientists and mainly not marine men. So he sent out the people which he didn't like, and he did send up the collection made up to Port Jackson. He sent back with the Naturalista. So the Naturalista arrived in France in 1803, and the remainder they started collecting and making a new collection from Port Jackson or Sydney onwards. What I did encounter when I was traveling around in Australia, I met up quite a few places, and this is Port Naturalista. What I later understand is Le Naturalista was one of the 2 ships of the Baudin expedition. Secondly, I went to Denham, and on the left-hand side there is Dirk Hartog Island. Dirk Hartog was a Dutchman which discovered the island in 1670. And when he arrived at that island, he made an iron memorial, and he placed it down on the island. What happened in 1697, Willem de Vlaming arrived with a ship on the same spot, and he found the iron plate. He took the iron plate with him, and it's now situated in the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. But he erased a new plate. And the new plate was found in 1802 by the Baudin, of 1801 by the Baudin expedition. They took it with them to France, and eventually they gave it to the Australian government. It's now in the Fremantle Museum of Western Australia. I lived in 1995, I lived for 6 months on the island of Freeland, and I constantly saw signs of Willem de Vlaming. I had no idea who he was. Now I was doing the Baudin expedition, and that was Willem de Vlaming. He erased the sign, the Baudin expedition took the sign with him, so finally my gap of Willem de Vlaming is now filled in. This is Cape Lewin, where the Indian Ocean and the Southern Ocean diverge. It's also sailed and drawn by the Baudin expedition. Two People's Bay, named after the meeting with an English sailor, Mr. Pendleton and Baudin. So that's the reason why it's called Two People's Bay. This is Partridge Island in Tasmania. This is where the Baudin expedition stayed for a little while in 1802 and collected quite some birds. There's an aerial view on the southern part. You see Chicken Island. That's also mapped by the Baudin expedition. This is it's such a difficult French name. I really have to look it up. Cap de Couedic. That's on the southern point of Kangaroo Island. This is Encounter Bay. This is where Flinders and Baudin met each other. And the funny thing is, Baudin didn't obviously not know that Flinders went to Australia. So he was really surprised that a ship was signaling to him that they are friendly. So when Flinders got on board, he said, "Are you the famous Captain Baudin?" And Baudin was really stunned from, "No, I am, but who are you?" Flinders did not say his name for this day. But their first conversation started with birds. So that's one of the big connections, because on board was Robert Brown, and he made a very good collection of birds, which part of it are still stored in the Natural History Museum in Tring. But Encounter Bay is really famous because the two men met over there. So I made the pilgrimage last year. This is the first flag post in the Sydney colony. Obviously the Baudin expedition was over there. I didn't heard of the Baudin expedition when I was at that point. And this is the dome. The dome is situated on Kangaroo Island, and in the dome there was this piece of rock. And this is the only piece of rock where the expedition carved in, or at least the only position where we know that there were some things carved in by the expedition. And this is on Kangaroo Island, and here is carved in. This site was visited by the Baudin expedition. So obviously I made last year the pilgrimage to see this rock. And my main story about this is I visited quite a lot of places in Australia. I didn't know anything about the Baudin expedition, and in fact I was meeting all these places where the Baudin expedition went. What did I find out on documentation of the expedition? There are quite a lot of documents, at least 17,500 documents, and a large part still contains birds, but not many people investigate those. What happened with this document on the left-hand side, here's the description of a gala written down, and that happened in Shark Bay. Vayot made the description of this bird, and we could finally work out with that description that it was collected in Shark Bay. That's how we work through every document to see what's going on, if there is any reference made to any birds, and that helped me to establish some type location of some birds. Perron, this is his autograph. He was responsible for the most documentation. The left-hand document is by Levelin. And on the right-hand side there is a sketch from Charles Alexander Zeur. First employed as cannoner. He was made naturalist after a lot of people died. When the ship at first went to Mauritius, nearly the half of the scientific staff went away from the expedition due to disagreement with Baudin. So obviously there was a place, and he was a very fantastic illustrator, and many drawings contain quite a lot of details, and we can still see birds mounted the way they were drawn. So what I think is what happened is that all the drawings were used by the people who mounted the birds, and you can see how they look like. A lot of information is written down on the left-hand side. That's noted in 1854. These are the acquisition books at the Paris Museum. We can find some notes on the left-hand side. You see two slices of paper that I located in the Archives Nationales in Paris. And the middle section is when the French left the Napoleonic Wars. There was a treaty made in 1815, the Vienna Treaty. What the French did is they stole quite a lot of natural history collections throughout Europe. They stole in the Netherlands, the Stadtholder collection, they stole in Russia some collections, and they stole in Austria some collections. And in 1815 they were forced to make repayments. And what we really would like in the Netherlands, that we got back our Stadtholder collection, but instead we received duplicates. And they included, most likely, a lot of birds from the Baudin exhibition. Unfortunately, from the 847 birds that returned to the Netherlands, there is no list. Luckily, the Austrian people got a full list, and they included a lot of birds from the Baudin exhibition. So that was my first connection where I saw, okay, so birds got diverted. They went to other collections. What I did is try to find all the possible specimens. These are the two ships, Le Geographe and Le Naturaliste. The left one is a very heavy corvette, very easy to handle, and the right hand is a store ship. And often there was a disagreement between the ships because the right hand ship was too slow, so Le Geographe had to slow down. What I did find out is on the pedestal undersides there is some text written. On the right hand side you see An 11, and on the left hand side you see An 12. And it took me nearly a year to understand what that meant. When the revolution happened, Napoleon started a new calendar of years. Yeah. So the first years after the French Revolution was An 11, An means years. So the first year after the revolution, it started in September. So An 11 is comparable with the arrival of Le Naturaliste. An 12 is comparable with the arrival of Le Geographe. And that really helps to understand which was collected on the first leg and which was collected on the second half. So that nearly cuts down the collecting localities in two. So that makes it quite easy to understand where some birds were collected. The other thing that helped was the drawings made by Charles Alexander Lazure. On the left hand side you see the King Island emu or the Kangaroo Island emu. We don't know. Both birds were collected. There is a skin available of Kangaroo Island. There is a skin available of King Island emu. There are Jansens available, but we don't know if the bird standing or the bird low is a King Island or a Kangaroo Island emu. What we do know is two birds arrived alive in France. They were first brought back to the garden of Josephine, the wife of Napoleon. They stayed a little while at her place, and then they finally went over to the Jardin du Plan. They lived up to 1822. But these give us the first idea how these live birds look like, and there is no bird ever to be found again after the Baudin expedition left the place. On the right hand side there is a New Holland honeyeater, and Lazure not only started his career at the Baudin expedition, but he also carried on with collecting. And he went for a long time. He went to North America and collected quite a lot of birds, and this is the head of a centaur crane. What happened on publication? On the left hand side and in the middle there are the works of the Baudin expedition. What happened? Baudin died in Mauritius. Perron, Freycinet and Lazure came back, and they completely disagreed with Baudin. So what they did in these publications is they erased the name of Baudin. They just referred to him as the commander. That's it. What they also did is they falsified quite a lot of locations, landmarks they made their own landmark numbers. So this work is very good, but contains quite a lot of falsifications. And that's the same thing that happened with birds. Birds are acknowledged to Perron and Lazare, but in fact Perron didn't collect a single bird. He even confirms it in various letters that he didn't collect a single bird, but his name is everywhere written on it. So that makes a complication for me. The thing is, at that moment in Paris there was not a skilled curator, so the value of the collection was not really appreciated. And what happened is that Le Vaillot and Temminck, what works you can see over here, and Vaillot made 23 parts of Le Nouveau Dictionnaire d'Histoire Naturelle, at least his entry in it. Both Temminck and Vaillot published the majority of the 180 type specimens, type species which were collected at the expedition. There's an extremely large number, 180 type specimens. And nearly half is sitting in, the half is still available and is still valid in modern day. One of the more important things is the taxidermy. I didn't think about taxidermy before I started this research, but I found that the taxidermy was extremely important. On the left hand side there is a note which was written by Dufresne in 1800, and Dufresne was first talking about using arsenic soap and a sort of powder to keep insects outside the skins. And with his preservation technique, which he learned from Becker, he changed taxidermy overnight. Dufresne was at that moment the chief taxidermist at the Paris Museum, and he worked together with his wife on the birds which arrived back from the expedition. As it was common at that period, when birds arrived, they were directly mounted for galleries to show the grandeur of the expedition. And Dufresne not only worked on this expedition, we found various other names of people which were involved with taxidermy. For example, Becker, but also Lalande and Dufresne also kept large part of the expedition for themselves and exchanged it with other collections. So we find, for example, in the Vienna Museum, we find birds back from Baudin donated or sold by Becker, but we also found birds back from Lalande, from Dufresne, but we found also birds back donated by the Paris Museum itself. So that makes the picture rather complicated where things end up. What helped me was the use of X-rays, and as I explained it to Robert earlier today, you can see here a variation of X-rays, and one is more clear than the other. One shows very good detail, including possibly the light dots explaining arsenic, but other birds don't display arsenic, or at least don't show it, and that's mainly because of the settings. What you see here is the metal work differs in every bird, and that basically means another workshop, another taxidermist which worked on these birds. On the left hand side you see an emu that was collected in Port Jackson, arrived back in the natural history. The middle side there is a yellow-tailed black cockatoo that arrived also from the Sydney area. On the right hand side there is a Puerto Rico cuckoo, Puerto Rico cuckoo that arrived back from the first expedition from Baudin, from the Caribbean. So obviously when then already arsenic was being used, it should be used on the other birds too. But we can't see it because this is number 7 in the middle, that's another Puerto Rican cuckoo. And this X-ray made in the Paris Museum doesn't show any light up like the above birds. So possibly there is arsenic in it, but we can't see it. And on the right hand side there is a parrot from the brown tree creeper, also from the Baudin expedition. And you can see here is a stall where the wires are wound up. Above there is a sort of the same. In the middle specimen that wasn't mounted before, there's one straight metal running up to the eye. The other one got a twisted metal. This one got a twisted metal, so there are quite a few variations in the preparation style from the same exhibition, and that keeps me wondering how much what's going on in that time. But overall, the metal used is the same thickness in the most specimens. The museums where I came across was obviously the Paris Museum, Jardin du Plan. These Cuba parrots are just illustrations because it's a very nice extinct species. What I came across in Paris in the zootech is the mounted specimens are stored in large rooms, and the skins are stored in very cramped skin cabinets. And what I had to do during my, I think, 15 visits or so, or my months spent in basements, in cellars or whatever, I went through all the specimens and tried to find the Baudin ones. And the documentation was rather poor, so I still miss out 40 birds which could be present, but specimens are stored on 5 different places, so sometimes things got very shaky. So more specimens will be found in the future. Dufresne, he was the main taxidermist, but he also had an own private collection. And he offered his private collection in 1815 first to the Berlin Museum, and then finally he offered the collection in 1818 to Edinburgh, and still the specimens are over there. And on the left hand side there's that big book, and the specimens are noted in that big book, and that really helped me to find the missing specimens. Other specimens, and the photograph of one of them is over there. There are quite a lot of specimens in Vienna, and above there is a photograph of a selection of those specimens. They all ended up, due to the Vienna Treaty, they ended up in 1815, in 1807, and 1809, and 1810. There were batches that arrived in the museum, but the main batch was 1815. Then there is the lovely collection of Abbeville, and Abbeville got a very beautiful collection. It stopped roughly, I think, about 1870, and still how it's stored above, it's still stored in modern day. And we are really waiting for someone who pick up the challenge to sort out what is going on and what's really in there. What we can see, however, in the central piece, there is a snail-eating cua, there is an ivory-billed woodpecker, and there are quite a few very interesting birds of it, but it's a really mess. And it was one of the collections where the family Baudin had some involvement with, and Baudin were very good friends of the Paris Museum. They exchanged quite a lot, and a lot ended up in here. This collection was closed for researchers for a very long time, but eventually I got in, but it was too much work, so I stopped after a little while. But I found at least 2 birds from the Baudin exhibition amongst these ones. Another collection, Stockholm. To understand what was going on prior to 1800, I had to go to Stockholm to understand what went on. In the centerpiece there are birds under Sparman, made on the second Cook voyage, and on the right hand side 2 supposed birds from the third Cook expedition. However, we published in the now still last volume of the Bulletin that we think these birds could be from the Cook expedition, but it could be also from another voyage. We don't know. We couldn't say it based on taxidermy stuff, and we couldn't say it on documentation that's still present. Obviously, I've visited quite a lot of libraries to understand what's going on, and one of those works is the collection by Temminck. It's a publication made in 1807, and I was constantly looking for annotations, and maybe it gives me a clue, but I couldn't find nothing, unfortunately. I found out 4 copies, original copies, but no copy could help me. We visited some German collections, and one of the research I did was with Frank Steinheimer. We did our presentation on the left-hand side in Erfurt, and we did our work in Göttingen. And what we did is we made X-rays of 105 specimens collected prior to 1805, including the Baudin birds, and tried to understand what was going on. And Frank is doing in perfect German his presentation on the Baudin expedition, and I could just sit down and listen to him. Because my German is not that good as Frank is. On the left-hand side, I brought together some birds of the Baudin expedition. These are birds which already became spread possibly in 1804, 1805, and this is the first time possibly they were brought back together. On the left-hand side, these are no types, or at least they are not recognized as types. But for example, above there is a brown-eared kite, that's a type. On the right-hand side, these are the above two birds are selected types. The bird in the middle is not a selected type. However, very recently, I published a paper on type specimens of Timor, and the central bird, it's the type of the beach stickney. On the right-hand side, there's a yellow-tailed cockatoo, one of the very few skins which survive, which I thought survived at the Baudin expedition. However, it's not a skin, but it's an excrement. So there are no skins known from the Baudin expedition. These are type specimens of the yellow-throated honeyeater. The above two birds are selected by the Paris Museum based on the description in French by VO. However, there are more specimens, and on the left there is a bird in Edinburgh, and on the right-hand side there is a bird in Vienna. And possibly VO used all these birds for his type description, but we are not sure. And I'm not very positive on that only the two birds above were used for the type description. So that's some room for debate in the future. One of the more interesting things is Baudin received quite a lot of donations. And it was not a very common practice that people donated birds to the expedition at the time. We only know some natives which donated birds. But over here, George Bass donated some birds. Bass met the Baudin expedition in 1802 in Sydney, and he was just prior to that, he went to New Zealand, to Tonga, to Tahiti, to Hawaii. He collected quite a few birds and sent them back to the Baudin expedition. And when I was researching the birds from the Baudin expedition, I came across those old birds from Tonga, from New Zealand, and I couldn't understand it at all, because I only knew the Cook expedition went to those islands and no one else. And then I researched the itinerary of George Bass. He was at all those places. He was at Hawaii, he was at Tonga, he was at Samoa, he was at New Zealand. So he is one of the collectors which was responsible possibly for a number of specimens, and that included possibly those two eels which I showed earlier from Stockholm. Another donator was François Désiré Dumont. He was originally part of the Baudin expedition, but he left during a disagreement in Mauritius, but he donated quite a few birds when the expedition came back to Mauritius. The other one is the Dutch general Jan Willem Jansen, and he donated, for example, some live emus. This young unfortunately died on board, but what I could find out, this is the oldest emu in the world, of the oldest ostrich in the world. The same happened with Jean Massé. He was a correspondent for the Paris Museum. There was a large load that arrived in 1801, but he sent a large load of 135 birds back with the Baudin expedition, and they were included in the totals of 1,055 birds that returned in the Paris shipments. What happened was, the problem is I couldn't sort out which bird was given back by Massé on the Baudin expedition, because there was an earlier load and there was no distinction made. So these are part of the birds which I couldn't identify which were brought back on the Baudin expedition. What I do find out is, I don't going to mention all these locations, but these are the birds which I designated with using all the material which I got available for me. Is in Tenerife, I can find one bird, and that bird, a white-winged black-turned, was not even collected between 12 and 14 November, between 2 and 14 November, the 12 is a mistake. It was collected prior. They left a case with birds in 1797 in Tenerife. They dug up the case, and we brought back one bird which interests him, and that's the first white-winged black-tern for Tenerife. And I think there are now 2 or 3 records on the Canary Islands, so that's a really important record. The other ones I designated based on collecting locality which I could find, and based on subspecies and some annotations which could be located. In total, the total number of surviving specimens is now 389, and it represents the largest collection still existing in modern day from that time period. If you compare that, Frank Steinheimer estimated the number of 1,500 up to 3,000 birds collected prior to 1800, 389 is a reasonable large number. And with this in place, they also got a full data set, so they are extremely valuable for science at this moment. What are the main exploits? There are 2 extinct species, King Island emu and kangaroo island emu. 3 critical endangered species nowadays, Regent honeyeater, swift parrot, and Mauritius olive wide-eye. 8 endangered species, sooty albatross, Australian bittern, both are fortunately not surviving. Australian painted snipe, shore-billed cockatoo, Timor green pigeon, and Mauritius kestrel. The fun thing about shore-billed cockatoo is there is one bird known today as Baudin's cockatoo. And Baudin's cockatoo was described by, how was the famous artist called? I forgot his name. John Lear. Yeah, by Lear. It turned out, this bird is in Liverpool, and it turned out that that bird was not a Baudin's cockatoo, but a shore-billed cockatoo. And that shows really much how much confusion was going on. Timor green pigeon, Mauritius kestrel, obviously a very threatened species at one stage. Southern cassowary, there was one ship alive, it was donated at Mauritius by a Dutch captain. Cape gannet, hooded plover, and Mauritius coopershrike. What I found out is the most prolific bird collectors are Charles Alexander Lazure. He collected 370 species, at least what I could registrate. René Moguet 178, Jean-Baptiste Désiré Dumont 38, all from Mauritius, and Levelin 11. Lazure only started collecting after René Moguet died, and Levelin collected a few birds before he died, and Dumont stayed at Mauritius. So Lazure is the true hero of bird collecting for the Baudin expedition. There are still some things open for research. A little while ago, Andrew Black and I and some other people, Philippa Horton of the Adelaide Museum and Jean Fornacero from the Adelaide University, we published a paper on this drawing. And we could not conclude if this was a scrub bird or a Bristol bird. What I found out in the archives, I found a description, and the description looks really good, looks very good for a Bristol bird. And if it's accepted by the ICZN, it represents a new taxon for science. But only the drawing exists and the description exists, that's it. And the species is extinct because on the island where it lived, it's no longer present anymore. My last dot is what I stayed on Vlieland, and this is the plate which was collected in 1802 by the Baudin expedition on in Shark Bay. This is my end, this is my thesis, and it roughly looks like this. The ornithology of the Baudin expedition, and I'm doing an explanation of every species I came across, putting in photographs and what I found out, what was on the original label, and what they represent in time. That's my story.